I think there is no more significant indicator to the future of Taiwan than what happens in Ukraine now. I'm wondering, from your perspective as someone who's been at pro-Ukraine advocacy a lot longer than I have, how are other activists thinking about Taiwan, the pro-Taiwan community? Is there room for a relationship between the pro-Ukraine and pro-Taiwan camps? Have these conversations started?
These conversations actually started quite some time ago. We've here in New York City, we've actually met with many different protest groups, and many of them would just come to our protest that we organize. They saw this conflict in Ukraine as something that can unite all of us. And I think one of them really, I think it was actually an Iranian activist that I spoke to when we did joint protest with them. They put it really well, where while they were giving a speech, they said, the dictators of the world are uniting together. Putin with Russia, Iran, China, the various different regimes in like Myanmar and whatnot in Burma. And we have to unite together against them because we're not necessarily doing that, but we have to. And, we've started to do that now. We have to unite against them, us, the people who we refer to ourselves as, the free people who are independent, who value democracy and liberty. And we have to unite just as they did, because they stand counter to everything that we want to stand for. And
Didn't Putin and Xi Jinping, the leader of China, say they have a no limits friendship?
yes,
Don't we need something like that on our side?
we have to have it. It's not that we just need it. We have to create that. And I'm taking efforts to do that. I will say this, the Taiwanese community is very active here in New York also. I do know with what's happening in China, they're definitely focusing on themselves now, but they showed tremendous support to us. I remember even in Taiwan, seeing people wearing masks, for example, during protests. They're saying, we want to be like Ukraine. We will be like Ukraine. And I think there's a lot of similarity between our struggles. There is. Two nations that are trying to fight a much greater Goliath that, seeks to oppress and basically erase what we are. And, I do firmly believe that Taiwan has the right to be independent and free on its own. It shouldn't have to, see to the CCP. And
Chinese Communist Party.
yes, and I really do think that we have to take greater strides as people, as communities, to really just create that united front.
Absolutely. We were kind of engaging in a hypothetical conversation with Americans who didn't want to be involved, with people who pointed out somewhat correctly that U.S. Didn't necessarily have to support Ukraine as strongly as it did, but that's a fantasy with Taiwan. Even if that's your point of view, and I do respect that, I think it's important that we make clear that there is no possibility U.S. will not have to put thousands, tens of thousands of lives and massive spending in materiel if we are in a conflict with China over Taiwan or over the South China Sea. For one, the leading microprocessor producer, TSMC, is in Taiwan. You won't be able to buy a toaster without those processors. You won't be able to buy anything. All goods rely on these processors nowadays. Most devices you have several TSMC components in it. You add to that our issues with China go far beyond Taiwan, and they go into U.S. presence in the Pacific, which is absolutely fundamental to every aspect of the American lifestyle. Walmart's shelves will be empty without the U.S. Navy in the Asia-Pacific region. And I think that's one of the reasons. I confess, I didn't know that much about Ukraine or Ukrainian culture. I was really interested in geopolitics a year ago. I've been following geopolitics for a long time, and at least in my way of thinking, if the U.S. shows that we will throw people under the bus who want democracy, who want to be part of the West, who are in conflicts with aggressive empires, and we stick our heads in the sand and retreat into a kind of, little island mentality that will explode in our faces in Taiwan. We're talking about the loss of aircraft carriers. We're talking about, what we're spending on Ukraine will be pennies on the dollar compared to the economic losses of a conflict with China. And it's a difficult situation. We cannot wave a magic wand and make Putin go away or make China go away or make them less interested in committing genocide in Ukraine or in Taiwan. And the option available to us is to provide a strong deterrence that if you attack, there will be a really high price to pay. And this is emotional to me. I see what's happening in Ukraine as setting the tone for the coming decades in international security, in American security. And I think Ukrainians and the brave Ukrainian soldiers are sending the most powerful message imaginable that you cannot triumph over smaller countries, you cannot defeat the West, and that when we are united and when we are aligned for our values, we will prevail.
No, definitely. It's not just about how much land you have. It's more about the people and the spirit. And the fact of the matter is, don't back down. No matter how great of an evil you might be fighting, the odds might be stacked so much against you. The Ukrainian soldiers I've spoken to all said the same thing to me. I've met quite a few of them here in the United States who might come here to receive prosthetics because they were wounded. And some of them even said, I'm going back to the front line to keep fighting because my fight is not over. And Ukraine might not be the biggest country in the world. And I remember reading stories about foreign volunteers. I remember the story of the first foreign volunteer to be killed in Ukraine from Taiwan. He said that he was going to fight on the side of light. It might seem like it might seem like a David and Goliath story where these people are these tragic warriors that are fighting against this much greater evil that's so much bigger than them, but they're winning. They were able to stop Russia, for example. Prior to this war, I think we were all under the assumption, we all estimated that Russia was this great military power. Ukraine was given 3 days, then a week, then a few weeks. And it's been over a year now. And
now we're talking about, will Russia collapse?
yeah, now we're looking at the possibility of Russia's collapse. So I think we really shouldn't necessarily be all that scared of these nations. We have these deterrents and we can stop them from spreading their influence. We have that power, and we can do it and prevent potentially even deadlier conflict in the future. And that's what I would prefer. I don't think anybody, again, wants war. We all, I think, want peace. I think that's generally something that we all can share.
But sometimes you have to fight.
Unfortunately, sometimes we have to fight to create that peace. Freedom, one of the messages a lot of Ukrainians will always repeat to you is that freedom comes at a price, and Ukrainians are paying that price.
This is why I feel that Ukrainian resistance to Russia, and here I'm leaning on Professor Andrew Snyder here, is making the world a more peaceful place. Yeah. And I'm sorry, it's not Orwellian. I have no shame in saying that whatsoever. Ukrainian resistance for the rule-based international order, they are fighting to defend their rights as an independent sovereign country, is sending such a strong message to other would-be empires, would-be dictators, and would-be invaders that, for me, I have to conclude that Ukrainian resistance is giving pause. This is not a success story for Russia. No matter what the outcome is, people see that Russia is losing its shirt in this conflict, and it sends a message that maybe it isn't such a great idea to invade your neighbor.
I think we could even take a step further. It's most likely a message to not just Russia, but to really many other different regimes in the world. Because I think with Ukraine, we're seeing something really unique. Just like we kind of had the Arab Spring, we're now having this sort of rise in movements where people saw that Ukraine survived and it was able to withstand a power like Russia, and that inspired people to say, we can do something. Many of the Iranians I spoke to look at us, Ukrainians, as this example saying, we need to do what you did, and that it's possible and that we should not fear, even though, yes, it's not going to be easy, and there most likely might even be death and some consequence, but we have to do it, and it's possible for us to win, because it's not just about how much land or what your numbers are. It's about that ability and that spirit to resist.